class?
It's not a classroom, but one toward the front of the stool, it's the last one.
So Dennis,
Here's a blue. Right?
Okay.
Still muted. Not there.
Lori is no longer muted, so we should hear Lori. I can sort of hear you, Vince.
she has to be in the other room.
Reason what?
She has to be in the other room.
Yeah, because otherwise we hear us.
Too much feedback if
How
I
about now? All right, how about now? I don't hear me coming through.
hear Lori.
How about now?
Hello? Ah, there we go. Yep. Yay. Lori, do you hear me? Me? Yes, I hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, you're on too.
Okay.
Y'all want to take a look, see at this?
Yeah, I had to do the first couple. So it looks fine.
Dennis, do Michael's live. You really mute yourself.
Let's see. Everything looks okay. You already have, you're turning off chat, right?
Dennis,
Yeah.
you want to mute yourself.
Do what now?
You want to mute yourself. We can hear you on the call. While you're talking to them.
Okay.
You're kind of faint, but we heard you.
All right, so where am I going to start? Let's block me here. Yeah, that's good. Where you can see the whole red side of the field. That looks good. Sure. Like that.
Lori, are you ready to go?
I am ready. It's, we've got, oh, we're late. Wait, what time? My
I've
watch
got a
is on.
minute. We've got 1 minute.
1 minute.
Okay.
Should I start my
People
spiel?
coming in?
We have 20 participants total.
I will, but I will take it off later.
We ready to start?
Oh.
Good afternoon. Just a reminder that this session will be recorded and we will be using Q&A. Chat is turned off. Remember your gracious professionalism. Lori O'Neill, head referee for the state of Georgia, is your presenter. Recording will start now, I hope. And take it away, Lori.
Okay. She needs to make us the presenter. Okay, there we go. Hello, I am Lori O'Neill. I am your Georgia FTC head referee. I'm wearing my mask now because I have people in the room with me, but they're all moved 6 feet away. Take it off for this presentation. We are going to have a very strange, fun, but fun as well. I am very excited about this game. I know I say that every year, and I'll probably say it again next year, but I mean it every year, and especially this year, because this game is fantastic. There are very interesting and challenging things to do, especially in autonomous and in endgame, and there will be rings flying all over the place, and it's going to be great. Most of you are going to start out the season doing remote events, and I know you're going to have a lot of questions about how that's going to run, and to tell you the truth, we all do, but I will try and answer your questions as best as I can. The important thing is that the game is the same, whether you're remote or traditional event. In fact, you now know that you've got two game manuals, one for traditional and one for remote. And if you look inside, you'll notice that there are 30 game rules, and only 3 of them do not apply to remote events. And there are 13 game-specific rules, and again, only 3 of them don't apply to remote events. It's the same game. Now, I know you've all just seen some presentations from our partners, Stephen and from First, and they've gone through the game. And I'm going to try to not be very redundant, but what I'm going to focus on are things that are different this year from previous years, and things that are different between remote and traditional events. I'm going to go through the game, but this doesn't mean that you don't have to carefully read the game manual. It's very important. There's no way that we can cover everything that you need to know that's in that game manual. Also, it's important that even if you're starting remote, that you get familiar with the traditional manual as well, because hopefully we'll be transitioning into traditional events, and you don't want to be at a disadvantage and get to that event and not pass inspection, for instance, or not have a strategy that works with a traditional event. One thing that's very different this year, and both Stephen and Ken went over this, is the ranking. The ranking points are based on match scores, and the tiebreaker points are based on autonomous and endgame scores, as they said. The only thing I will add to what they say is that this year, different from previous years, penalties are deducted from your match score. So in previous years, they were added to your opponent's match score, but this year you may not have an opponent if you're remote. So instead, it deducts from your match score, and that will affect your ranking. Keep that in mind. Another thing that's different this year is there's no more grace period at the end of autonomous and at the end of the match. In previous years, you had a 1-second grace period after the end of the buzzer before you had to stop and park your robot. This year, if your robot is not parked motionless at the end of the buzzer, then you're going to get a penalty for playing the game late. Keep that in mind. It's different. Now let's talk about the fields. We've got, what you're seeing here is a traditional field with a blue side and a red side. And it's everything you would expect. It's got the Andy Mark walls around it and all of the field elements for both sides. And now we're going to go over here and take a look at a remote field that we've got set up. So as you can see, as you've been told, if you're doing a remote event, you don't even need to have a boundary, but you might want one. You can use a traditional Andy Mark boundary if you want to, or you can build your own. And First has some instructions for you if you want to build your own. Also notice that even though we're calling this a half field, really with the floor, it is a 2/3 field. It is 12 feet back and 8 feet across. Otherwise, you've got one side of the playing field that looks just like the red side on the traditional field. So let's go back over to the traditional field to talk about the game. I'm going to talk about the game a little bit. I'm going to go through it quickly. I know you've seen it twice already, and then we will open it up for questions. So if you've got your questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A panel in your WebEx session, and we will go through everybody's questions later. I'm sure everybody didn't get to ask their questions when the first was answering questions before. I'm going to answer questions until 2:30, and then we're going to take a break. And then at 2:45, Mr. Weston is going to measure the field elements for you. Since you cannot be here to measure field elements, he's going to do that for you. So save those questions for his 2:45 session after this one. All right, ready to play the match. I have my robot, and it is up against the front wall toward the audience. It is touching that wall, and it has one wobble goal preloaded. Preloaded means that it's either touching my robot or it's possessed by my robot. That is required. I may have up to 3 rings preloaded as well. Now, whatever rings I don't preload, whatever rings I'm not using, they're going to go, well, this is interesting. So in the game video, it said they go back into the human player station. But in the game manual, it says that they go into your low goal. So I'm going to put them there. You do not get points for them being in the low goal. It's just a convenient place to put them. All right. And the other thing you need to do is, if you have an autonomous, you need to choose your op mode. But what you don't need to do, and this is different from previous years, you do not need to initialize your autonomous program before randomization. So in past years, some teams had trouble with that, where they would initialize their autonomous and then we'd randomize. And by the time we got to the match, something happened, your autonomous stopped. It caused problems. So this year, if you don't, you may initialize your autonomous, but you don't have to, and you can wait for 3, 2, 1, go, and then have a double press of init and start. But you must choose your op mode before randomization. The only time you have to init your autonomous before randomization is if you need it to be running in order to stay within the 18-inch cube limitation. Okay, randomization. As you saw, we're randomizing these target zones. This is A, B, and C for the blue side, A, B, and C. And the number of rings that are here in your starter stack depend on which of those zones are chosen during randomization. If A is chosen, you won't have any rings here. If B is chosen, you will have 1 ring. And if C is chosen, you will have 4 rings. And that's how your autonomous robot will know to which of the target zones to go for. What you're doing with that is you are going to get 15 points if you are able to get your wobble goal completely in the selected target zone. So it has to be completely in. That has a definition. The definition's in the game manual. Read your game manual. So that's one way to get points in autonomous. The other way is to navigate your robot to be on the launch line. This is the launch line. So, speaking of launching, last year, launching was forbidden. No launching. This year, Launch-a-rama. We're going to have lots and lots of launching. It's going to be good. So, where can you launch from? There's a launch zone. The launch zone is from this line to the front of the field. During autonomous, you can launch into your high goal or mid goal. Remember, On a traditional field, your mid goal is on the other side of the field. So you must, to score in those, the mid and high goals, you need to launch from over in the launch zone. You can also get points for putting rings into the low goal. You can do that from anywhere on the field, any way you want to. The points are 3, 6, and 12. Of course, if you are on and I'm going to stay here, but if you are on a remote field and you only have 1/2, your mid goal is going to be here. So it's going to be low, mid, and high. If you have an autonomous program that scores into your mid goal, that's great. Totally not discouraging that. Get those 6 points for each one. But if you transition to a traditional event, you're going to have to change your autonomous program, because if you continue to score into the mid goal over here, you are going to be giving points to the other team. And you don't want to do that. Another way to get points during autonomous is the power shots. So hitting these back from being forward to going back against this bar, that gets 15 points each. That is 45 potential points right here, folks. And once again, the only way to score those are to launch from in the launch zone. Right now, that's it for autonomous, but I'm going to talk to you about the limits. The limits this year is a maximum of 3 rings being controlled by your robot at a time. Remember that if a ring gets caught inside your robot, that counts toward the 3. So what you want to do is design your robot so that can't happen. All right, so that's 3, and the other limit is for the wobble goals, you can only control 1 wobble goal at a time. All right, so we're done with autonomous. It's time for driver control. Driver control, the scoring is all about your tower, just your tower. The points now are 2, 4, 6, right? Remember, it's over there. Or if you're remote, it's 2, 4, 6. This is when your human player has to wake up. A human player has 2 very important jobs. If a power shot has been pushed back, then the human player needs to push it back forward before endgame starts. And that way, your team can get points for it during endgame. So one important thing, push these forward in time for endgame. The other important thing is to get rings back on the field by putting them through your return rack, which is back here. So now I am the human player. My area, if you can see me, is from behind the tower and to the middle of this net right here. Over here, there's a net too, and this is where your scoring ref is going to stand. That, of course, is only in traditional events. When you don't have a traditional event, when you're at remote event, if you notice over here, no nets, rings everywhere. So here, we don't have a human player station per se. You can move anywhere you need to move to get whatever rings are back here, either from the ones that are in the goal itself or the ones that have fallen behind, and get those back on the field. Uh-oh, I don't have an edge, so there goes that one. Okay. Oh, and your robot cannot sit underneath the return rack and catch these rings. Your robot must let the ring hit the floor before picking them up, or that will be a penalty. So, driver control for a minute and a half. You're scoring in the tower. And now it's the last 30 minutes. It's end game. what can you do now? You can continue scoring in the tower. You can, if your power shot targets are forward, you can hit them back again for another 15 points each. Another 45 points there. And the other thing you can do is if your wobble goal is either in a target zone or outside of the launch zone, anywhere outside the launch zone, you can deliver it either to the start line for 5 points, or put it, do not launch it, no launching of wobble goals, outside the field into the drop zone for 20 points. And this is where if you are on a remote field and you have decided not to put a border around, then you can't get those 20 points. You need to have some kind of 12-inch border in order to get those 20 points and end game. All right. Now, before we go into the questions, I just want to emphasize that not only do you need to read the game manual, you need to keep up with the game forum. The game forum link is in Game Manual Part 2, Appendix A. It's a place where you go to ask questions and get official answers from the Game Design Committee. Now, when you ask some of the questions you're going to ask, I'm going to answer them with, that's a good question for the Game Design Committee. That's a good question for the Game Forum. And I will direct you there. And that's in any case where I am also unclear on the rule. I am not going to give my own interpretation. I'm going to ask you to get that interpretation from the Game Design Committee. But hopefully I'll be able to answer most of your questions. All right, Janice, first question. I forgot something. Another way to get in-game points is to put rings on your wobble goal. Okay, for every ring that's completely supported by the wobble goal, you will get 5 points, no matter where it is. You don't have to have scored it. It doesn't need to be on either side of the field. Wherever it is, 5 points for each of them that are completely what's that? Okay, I'm ready for the first question.
Lori?
Yep, I'm ready.
Okay, real quick. Remember, we also had one last night where you rested it on the edge and it wasn't supported through that middle part. Show them that as well. Okay, where's my camera? Yes, as long as it's supported by the wobble goal, even if it's not on the post, if it's completely supported by the wobble goal, you'll get your 5 points. Okay, going to questions. Here's our first question. If we are doing remote, we would need a field, right? Then would it have to be a full or half field? This is a concern for us because of the scoring as if we had a half field. Okay. If you're remote, you will have what's called a half field, although it's really a 2/3 field, just like this one. And you will need to buy the game elements from AnyMark. You'll need to get at least the wobble goals and the rings and set up a field like this. There are instructions for making this out of cardboard, making the goal out of cardboard, and that is a very economical way to do that, or you could purchase these from AnyMark as well. So you would purchase half the game elements, basically, and you would need to have some kind of floor. I don't even think it has to be the tiles, but you want it to be as close as you can to a real field if you can, because when you transition to be
into a traditional event, if you ever do, then your robot will be used to that kind of field. I hope I answered that question as intended.
Let's hope we do get to go to real events one of these days. So the next one, I'm going to go to two questions in one because they're basically the same thing. They mentioned the half field setups in kickoff, but if one of the scoring goals is on the other half of the field, how does that work?
Well, in the remote half field, all of the scoring goals are on the same side. Even though it's got the different color on it, it will, so you see this is a red side of the field. This will be the red low, this will be the red mid, and this will be the red high goal on a remote field. But when you transition to a traditional, you'll have to work on your game strategy because it will be on the other side of the field, your mid goal.
Would you please demonstrate the flexibility of the discs/rings?
Sure. They're pretty solid, but okay. Flexible. I'm pushing them in like that. Okay.
Yeah, they're definitely soft enough that they're not good dog chew toys. They would rip up easily. They're very light.
Yes.
So they are going to fly interestingly. Yeah, but they are very flexible. They will bounce off of things. I think you saw in the video when they were doing the kickoff, they threw rings at things and they bounce pretty well. So if you hit a solid surface, it's going to bounce off and not go through or not go where you may have intended.
Okay.
Does the human player need to return the rings ASAP, or can they wait?
They cannot wait. So that would be considered, especially if you're, well, if you're in a traditional match, holding the rings back there would be considered hoarding them because you're keeping them from going back on the field so the robots can play with them. If you're on remote, of course, you want your team to be able to play with the rings, right? That's just hampering your own team. So there's actually a penalty for hoarding the rings back there. You want to get them out as soon as you can. And one thing to know is you can't bring like a box or anything, but you can pick up, as the human player can pick up as many rings as they want in their hands, but you put them through the return rack one at a time.
I know you said that a ring trapped on a robot counts toward the 3 possessed limit, but what if you drive past the return chute and it falls on top of your robot? Would you incur the catching penalty if it was accidental?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Very possibly, because then I have to go to inadvertent and inconsequential. So in this case, it was inadvertent. You didn't do it on purpose, but it's very consequential. I would ask that question on the game form. It's a very good question.
Past rulings indicate that it's
Definition of
as
launching.
a ring trap.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead, Janice.
I'm sorry, what is the definition of launching?
The definition of launching is the same as last year, which means it is you do not have to throw it up in the air for it to be launched. As it's propelling the item such that it moves independently after it has lost contact with the robot is considered a launch. So if you're talking about the fact that you can't launch a wobble goal, you have to watch that. You can't kick the wobble goal around like that. You need to actually bring it wherever you want it to go. Yeah, you can drop it. So when you're dropping it outside of the field for your 20 points, that's not considered a launching. That's considered gravity.
And that feeds beautifully into our next question. Does the wobble goal have to be placed slowly on the ground, or can it just be dropped in endgame?
Yeah, so the game manual actually talks about that. If it is dropped in a way that it could get damaged, or that it could damage the surface that it is dropping onto, then that would be considered field damage, and you would get a penalty for that. So you want to be careful and treat our game elements nicely. Well, they'll be your game elements, actually.
So some people have asked about the weight. These game elements are fairly light. They weigh like 3 pounds or so, ballpark. And the rings are very light. These are well less than a pound. So yeah, it's fairly light stuff. And if you drop it, it'll make a bit of noise, but it's not going to break. And you shouldn't be dropping it from more than 12 inches high. Right. If you're dropping it from this height, don't do it. That's intentional damage and bad. So, but if you try and stack these, somebody asked in the earlier thing about stacks, we actually got height-wise, you can get 14 on here. But if you get 14 on there, it tends to try to fall over pretty badly. It'll also be an interesting question because if you try and put rings on this, I don't think you can put rings on it while it's outside, and I don't think you can transport it with more than 3 rings on it. So you got to think about your game goals.
Okay. Once a ring is on the wobble goal, it does not count toward the 3 limit.
There you go.
So
if you want to
don't worry about that.
Put them on the wobble goal.
Yes, but you can only put rings on the wobble goal during endgame. If you put a ring on a wobble goal before endgame, that's a penalty.
Actually, that made me think of something. What if I were to drop my wobble goal over the side and then put rings on it?
I don't remember seeing anything against that. However, there is something in there that says, so normally you cannot go outside the field. It would be a penalty to extend outside the field. That's one of the game rules every year. But now there's a game-specific rule that says specifically you are allowed to go outside if you are placing rings in your logo. That's one way your robot can extend outside the field. And when you're placing your wobble goal outside, it does not specifically say that you're allowed to go outside the field to put rings on the wobble goal. So most likely you cannot do that. But it's worth asking on the game forum. I don't think you can. It's not specifically said that you can.
Do the power shot goals click back when scored, or is there a possibility that they could be descored by the robot?
They don't click. They move back and forth fluidly. So yes, it could be descored.
They are reasonably heavy. There's a solid backstop there. So once they're knocked backwards, it takes some effort. Something would have to be coming from the backside to pull them forward. It's unlikely, based on the physics of this, that a robot would accidentally pull it back, especially since the robot is not allowed to reach outside the field to pull on them. Right? And you also would get penalties for messing with the opposing alliance's scoring items.
Right. So if you were talking about by mistake pulling it back, yeah, that probably wouldn't happen unless you didn't let. Well, first of all, you're not pushing it back with the robot. You're throwing rings at it. That's the only way to score those. So,
right. So the robot should never be near them.
Yeah. The only way to score those is by throwing rings at them from the launch zone.
We'll do some practice shots.
But what I'm doing here, yeah, you do practice shots, and I am going to throw for very well.
Okay, Vince gets my vote.
Oh, I'm glad you're doing that. I would not be doing that.
In Game Manual Part 1, they explained that ranking points for remote will be just for the team, while it is the alliance total in traditional. So right. How will that work when going into a league tournament It's a mix of traditional and remote.
That's right. So that was a very big concern of mine. So what we're going to do here in Georgia is make sure that doesn't happen. So we've got one league in Georgia that wants to do in person all for the whole time, the whole season. And for them, they're going to not have a partner at league tournament. They're going to have their own league tournament. We have many leagues who are thinking they're going to be remote, and then maybe the fifth meet or maybe the league tournament, then they're going to go to in person at that time. And the only way we're going to pair up leagues for league tournament is if they're in sync as to how many remote events they had versus how many traditional events.
All right, so everybody going into the competition will have the same number of remote events, so they'll all have the same number of things being scored the same way.
Yep.
So it'll be a wash in the end. Yes, they're different. As long as everybody's different in the same way, it won't affect your relative scores.
Right.
What is the bendiness of the ring? Can you show that one again?
Maybe get closer. What's the best way to show that? Here, I push it together. It's pretty bendy, right? This way?
They're very light. They're very easy to bend. The thing you're going to have to think about in throwing them is they're very light, so the air resistance compared to the weight of them is going to be a factor in how well they throw.
Yep. And you also you want to treat them nicely so that they don't get permanently bent or ripped or anything like that. So be careful about that. That would be field damage, and that would be a penalty, a big one.
What is the diameter of the hole in the ring, and how much does the ring weigh?
Okay, so at 2:45, we're going to do measurements of all the game elements. So please come on back for Mr. Weston's session at 2:45, and we'll do all the measuring.
I will note that Game Manual Part 2 is available online, and if you download it, it has the specific measurements for the inner ring, the outer ring, all the placements on the field. All of that is measured in Game Manual Part 2, and you can download it now. It is live.
Can you use a full field at a remote competition, but only play on half of it?
I would say no. You have to read the remote game manual. There's a remote game manual part 1 and a remote game manual part 2. And it specifies what the field should look like for a remote event. And it looks like the 8x12 field that we have here.
To be clear, if you played with the full field, you would have more space on which to chase those rings. If you can put walls up and keep things in bounds, only being 8 feet wide, your robot will have less space in the throwing area to go chase the rings. So it should help you.
If the rings are staked on the wobble goal and that same goal is placed off the field and the goal wobbles so that some rings fall off, how is that scored?
Yeah, the rings are scored. That brings up a good point. This year, if you look in the definition part of the game manual part 2, they showed 3 different ways that a scoring activity can be scored. One is live. So the scoring in the tower goal, that is scored live. That's an example of an activity that's scored live. Another way is it's scored at the end of the match. And the third way is that it's scored when the field comes to rest. So you asked about the ring being completely supported by the wobble goal. That has to be at the end of the match, I believe. It's either at the end of the match or when things come to rest.
It should be at rest at the end of the match.
And if if it falls off, end of match is end of buzzer, at the buzzer. So it's a little different, the buzzer versus at rest. I remember one of the things that is scored at rest is
The power shots.
the power shots. I believe these are scored at the end. But anyway, if it falls off while you're putting it out, then you don't get the 5 points for it, is what it boils down to, which is what you asked.
And no, you cannot reach outside the field to retrieve the rings that fall off of it.
Correct.
Okay, we've also got several people asking about dimensions of the game and the goals. People, those will be answered at the 2:45 session with Mr. Weston. We are not taking those questions at this point. On to the next one. Does the ring have, okay, I'm guessing it's really supposed to be, does the robot have to launch the ring into the goal, or can we place it into the goal?
The only goal that you can, from the tower goal, that you can place a ring into is the lower one. So 3 points in autonomous, 2 points in driver control. You can come up here and place it. But you cannot score in the mid goal or the high goal. You cannot place rings in them. You must launch, and you must launch from the launch zone. The entire robot has to be in the launch zone. So I know somebody asked if you could reach out from the launch zone, but no, once you've reached out, that's the part of your robot, that arm, and that means that arm is not in the launch zone anymore, and you cannot do that.
And the rubric very carefully says minor and inconsequential extensions could be allowed, but if it's part of your arm that's throwing, it's by definition not inconsequential.
Or inadvertent.
So you need to stay back far enough that no matter how you use whatever you're doing for throwing or launching, doesn't cross that white line.
Yep.
And the ref will be looking carefully at that.
Does it take a lot of force to knock down the power shot targets?
Can you repeat that, please? You were cutting in and out.
Sorry. Does it take a lot of force to knock down the power shot targets?
No,
Oh, it's very light.
they're little pieces of plastic tubing, so it's, yeah, I mean, it's 3 or 4 pounds of force, but it's not a lot. All right, so it's a minor shot will push them. So remember, when you're doing the power shots, sorry, Larry, I'm jumping into your thing here. When you're hitting the power shot targets, you're going to shoot rings, or it's the only way to do it. You're going to knock one of these back. You can do that both in autonomous and in teleop. But doing it in autonomous is counted at the end of autonomous, at rest during that break between autonomous and teleop. The human driver then has until the start of endgame to reset it, right? And then you can score them again at the end of teleop.
Well, in in-game.
Right, well, in endgame, right. So you have another chance to score them. If you shoot them before endgame, though, yeah, bad news. So don't do it. If you're blue and you hit this and this, that's great. If your ring happens to bounce across and hit this, that's great too. Red will thank you because they'll take the points.
Yep.
Knowing that a robot cannot control or possess a ring until it touches the playing field floor when a human player introduces it into the field, is it legal for a robot to guide the ring down the playing field floor and subsequently into the robot?
Well, it's very variable. I think they showed that when on the first video how variable it is. Sometimes it goes this way, sometimes it goes that way. So you can have your robot sitting somewhere there as long as it's hit the floor first, but it might not go your way. It might not.
Human players are probably going to want to practice to see if they can get any kind of consistency on where the rings go. I will say that these are angled a little bit, so they tend to go toward the middle of the field, but not always.
Yeah, and plus, that's on your home field, and then if you go into a traditional event and somebody else has built it, it might go a whole different way. So you just don't know. It's meant to be random.
And And it's especially true that you will have a very different experience on a production field if your home field is homemade.
Yes.
Right? If you make this out of cardboard on your own, your experience with that return may be completely different from the game experience of most other teams, and that will impact how you work in live events.
What are the yellow rings made of?
Right. I don't know.
It's a fluffy foam. It's very flexible. It's very light. Again, it's like one of the dog toys, but much less dense, so that it's easy to damage. It may be in the manual, but they're very light. Very light.
Is there a weight limit for the robot?
Same 42 pounds. And we'll take all measurement questions at 245.
And that's,
by the way, that's in Game Manual 1 that's been out for months. So go read Game Manual 1.
What if a robot throws a ring in the net but misses it and it bounces to the other side's robot and the other team now holds 4 rings? Would that be a penalty for the team that launched it or the team that is holding it?
it wouldn't be a penalty for the team that launched it unless the referees thought that they were doing it on purpose, which usually doesn't happen until it has happened more than once. For the robot on which it landed, in previous years, they pretty much said it's your responsibility. So I would guess that's the same this year, but you can ask that on the game forum because sometimes they change their minds year to year on things like that.
Build your robots to keep foreign parts out that you aren't intentionally trying to pick up.
That's the best way to go.
Do we have to launch the rings at the targets, or can we hold a ring and hit the targets with the held ring?
Nope, you have to launch from in the launch zone. Your whole robot, including the arm, has to stay in the launch zone. So you cannot score it by putting your arm out close to the.
So if you're scoring with the rings, you can place them on the wobble. You can place them in the bottom goal. Any other version of scoring with the rings, including shooting at the power shots, not only has to be launched, but has to be launched from behind the white line. So if any part of your robot is on the other side, on the goal side of the white line, you will get penalties instead of points. So it would be pointless to try that.
What are the power shot pole things made of? Plastic, metal, or something else?
It's PVC.
Yeah, it's the same PVC piping we've been using in these games off and on for years. If you think back to the poles we've had in multiple games, it's just a shorter piece of that with a hole drilled through the bottom so it can pivot. That's all it is.
And it pivots very easily. Very smoothly.
It flops around, right? It's very, very loose. This is not a tight pivot, so really easy to knock it. The only thing holding it in place is the weight of that little piece of plastic.
To clarify, the only on-field indicator for a robot to see as to which square, A, B, or C, was chosen to place the wobble goal in is the ring stack, correct?
That is correct. 0, 1, or 4 rings will be in that stack, and that's what you use to figure out which target to go to.
And as with prior years where there were images set up for being able to recognize configurations of blocks and such, I expect you'll have images for this that the software is designed to see so you can get through that recognition fairly rapidly.
Maybe. We don't know that.
I said expect.
It says in the game manual that the wobble goals eligible to be placed outside of the field must be in the target zone of not located in the launch or not located in the launch zone. Does it have to be there before endgame, or can it be brought there and brought back during the endgame?
It needs to be in that position when endgame starts. So when endgame starts, it either has to be in the not launch zone. I really wish they gave a name for this zone, but they did not. Or it needs to be in, not, it doesn't have to be completely in, it just needs to be in a target zone. So this would be, I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, the red demo is better.
Okay.
They can see that one easier.
So this is the target zone. This is the only target zone that goes into the launch zone. So that means that it can be here in this target zone and be eligible to be delivered to either the line, the start line, or the drop zone. Neither of those delivery activities is eligible if you're not in one of those positions. If the wobble goal isn't in one of those positions, that's at the start of endgame.
For the 0, 1, or 4 rings that are on the field for randomization at the beginning of the match, can these rings be scored in addition to the 3 rings your robot starts with?
There is nothing in the game manual that says you cannot do that, so I would say that would be a yes.
If the rings get stuck on the power shot poles, can the human player remove them?
I don't know the answer to that. Ask that on the game forum. Did they say that? Yes, they said that on the first thing. They said yes, that the humans can come through and get it. So that probably, yes, it is not specified in the game manual. So I would love to see it in the game forum to make it official. But Ken and I think it was Ken that said that you can go through and the human player can go through and get it. It does specifically say in the game manual that if it somehow gets stuck in one of the targets and doesn't follow all the way through, the human player can get it only if there is no running robot within one tile of the tower. So you need to stay safe. Don't put your hand in there if there is a robot anywhere near the tower. And now I'm remembering during their presentation, that's what they said about this as well. There needs to be no robot here if you stick your hand in through to get anything as a human player.
You can still shoot at the human player with your launcher and try and hit these things while I'm pushing, but that wouldn't be nice.
He's so naughty.
That would not be gracious professionalism.
That's right.
You stated at the end of the match, there is no more grace for coming to a stop. Is that the entire robot or just driving? Is it okay if internal systems like flywheels, etc., are still coming to a stop since they would be rotating at a high rate of speed?
I would like you to ask that on the game forum. I would tend to think that that would be considered coming to rest, which could happen after, but go ahead and ask that on the game forum. It's a good question. Since that's different this year, we need to really make sure everybody understands that correctly and that everybody across the world understands it in the same way.
Are the images on the walls randomized at the start of each game?
No, the images stay exactly the same always.
What happens when a ring goes out of the playing field?
I missed a word there. When what goes out of the gameplay? A ring?
What if a ring goes out of the playing field? These things are being shot. I'm sure the aim is not going to be the best.
Okay, if you launch a ring and it goes outside the field over any wall except the back one, that is a penalty. A minor penalty for everyone that goes out on any of these 3 walls. But if it just goes out, like you drop it over the wall or whatever, if there are field personnel, they can put it back in. But none of the drive team or human player can go get it. If it goes behind, the human player can get it. The human player can get anything. On a traditional field, the human player has to stay in their human player station, which is from the middle to the end of the tower. And for remote, the human player could go anywhere on this side of the field to retrieve anything that goes out that way, and that's fine. But any other wall, you need to leave it there until a field personnel pick it up. And you'll have field personnel at remote meets as well. They will be maybe your coach or one of their team members that's not on the drive team can do that. But the drive team and the human player can't touch them.
If you're getting rings out enough that you really have to worry about somebody putting them back in for you, you need to think about your game strategy.
Well, there's that. There's also if the referee or whoever is acting as your referee determines that you're putting them out on a regular basis, such that it's no longer inconsequential, that would be a penalty for everyone that goes out. But the random bouncing off your robot and going outside the field, that would not be considered your fault. Or it would not be considered a launch either, I don't think.
I'm just going to try something.
Although there was a year where they said if something bounced off, it was considered a launch. So that might be a good one to ask the game forum as well.
So I tried throwing some rings about as hard as I could from about the sharpest angle I could get against the front of this goal, just to see if I could get any to fly out. And I'm throwing it from much higher than your robot could. It's going to be difficult to get anything to bounce off of that and carry far enough to get outside the field. The rings do a fairly good job of deadening themselves when they hit things. Again, they're squishy, so they're not rigid and they don't bounce as hard. They change direction, but as you can see, they fall pretty fast when that happens. They dump a lot of momentum.
And that reminds me, there in the game manual, it says to score, let's say in the low goal, since your robot will be right here, the ring has to go completely in and not pop back out. So if it hits this pole right here and pops back out, you don't get you don't score for that. Stay in, and your robot has to not be in anymore. And by the way, that's true also of if you in autonomous bring a wobble goal into the target zone, your robot can't be still touching it at the end of autonomous if you want to get the score. And of course you do. Of course you want to get the score. Do we have any other questions? What time is it getting to be? Oh, we've got 5 more minutes.
My computer was being silly. Lori, did you say that a wobble goal not in the target zone or launch zone cannot be picked up for endgame?
Well, you can't score for it. So I really wish this zone had a name. So if the target zone is in the launch zone, but not in a target zone, so if it's here, then you cannot get points for delivering it to the line or the drop zone. You can move it if you want to, but it has to, at the start of endgame, be either in a target zone or outside the launch zone to be eligible to get those points. Yeah, before endgame, you can move it there. So even if you're doing remote, and you moved one wobble goal during autonomous, then during Endgame, if you want to move the other one somewhere, so it's all eligible, you
During
to do
teleop.
that. Yeah, during teleop. Well, anytime really, as long as you don't do them both at the same time.
Right, and as long as it's done, as long as it lands there before the start of Endgame.
Okay, we're not seeing any other questions. So if anybody has anything, please
Okay.
jump in quickly.
Yep, that was good timing. Because we're almost out of time.
That, and for those of you who have measurement questions, go take a break, get a soda, and we'll be back at 2:45 for that.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great season. Good luck.